Welcome to Life Sciences by Tumi Selani. This is a YouTube online teaching platform dedicated to teaching life sciences content, sharing skills and insight to maximize your potential at academic success. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And please do share the link to this channel. This will help the channel grow and reach a wider audience of learners who may appreciate the lessons and also reach their academic success. Teachers, parents, and any other stakeholder are welcome to partake in the videos and contribute to the content in the comments. Without wasting any of your time, let's get right into it. This is a lesson series on the menstrual cycle that falls under the broader topic of human reproduction. My name is Tumi Selani. I am a teacher from Milner High School all the way in the Northwest Province. Before we get into the lesson, let us do a lesson breakdown on how the 3 lessons on the menstrual cycle are going to be structured. Like I said in a previous slide, this subtopic falls under a broader topic of human reproduction. I have decided to structure the menstrual cycle into 3 lessons. Each lesson will be contained within its own distinct video, so be sure to look at all 3 of the topics, of the videos, because they are interrelated. In lesson 1, we will be looking at the process of the menstrual cycle. We will be looking at the uterine cycle as well as the ovarian cycle. Lesson 2 will be on its own video, which we will be looking at the interpretation of the different graphs and how the different hormones are secreted at different days and their functions in terms of the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle. And then lastly, we will be doing exam type questions to prepare you for your formal tasks. On this slide, I will be discussing the introduction to the menstrual cycle. For you to be able to understand the menstrual cycle thoroughly, it is quite important for you to go back and study the structure of the female reproductive system. You need to know the different parts of the female reproductive system and how they function. So this lesson does not serve the purpose of discussing the different parts of the female reproductive system. You need prior knowledge of the female reproductive system to be able to understand the menstrual cycle. Okay, so this system that you see over there is the female reproductive system. And like I said, you must be well versed in the different parts of the female reproductive system. Okay, now, in terms of reproduction, fertilization is the first part of reproduction. Okay, guys? So remember, we said that fertilization is the fusion of the nucleus of a haploid sperm cell that fuses with a haploid ovum to produce a diploid zygote. That is fertilization. And fertilization should happen over there, either on this fallopian tube or on that fallopian tube. Every 28 days, the female body prepares itself for a possible pregnancy. Okay. Now, for pregnancy to occur, we need 2 things. We need for the ovaries to release an ovum, and then we need for the endometrium, the uterus lining, to be thick so that implantation can take place there. Okay, so let's look at an overview of how this fertilization occurs. All right, now, firstly, the male will insert his penis inside the vagina and deposit semen into the vagina. Semen contains 2 things. It contains seminal fluid and it contains sperm cells. So what you see over there are sperm cells. Of course, there isn't just 2 sperm cells. There are actually millions of sperm cells. But for the sake of space and for the sake of teaching, I'm only going to include a few. So the first point of entry is that the male will deposit his sperm cells into the vagina. And remember, these sperm cells are supposed to swim up the female reproductive system all the way to the fallopian tubes, where they are going to meet an ovum there. The site of fertilization is at the fallopian tubes. Okay, so like we said, the male would deposit the sperm cells into the vagina. So that part of the female reproductive system is the vagina. And then what's going to happen? The sperm cells are to swim up. They will pass through the part that we call the cervix, and then they will make themselves into, or they will swim into the uterus. Okay? And then from there, the sperm cells will move up or swim up to the fallopian tubes. So that part over there is the fallopian tubes. And then they will swim towards the ovum. Now, the ovum is produced by the ovary every 28 days. Like I said, a female on average produces 1 ovum. So the ovum will be produced in the ovaries, but it will be released there to the fallopian tubes. Okay. Now, at this point, the 1 sperm cell will fertilize 1 ovum, and then that is called fertilization. After fertilization, or after the ovum has been fertilized by the sperm cell, we will have 1 cell that is called a zygote. So the zygote, as it divides and makes more cells, will move down the fallopian tube, as you can see over there. And at this point, it will implant or attach itself to the endometrium. Now, we need for the endometrium to be thick so that the offspring or the embryo will implant itself there on the endometrium. This is where the offspring will be attached for the remainder of the 9 months. So, for reproduction to take place, we firstly need an ovum that is produced in the ovaries and released to the fallopian tubes. The sperm cell will fertilize the ovum in the fallopian tubes, and then it will be a zygote. The zygote will divide, and then it will move down the fallopian tubes to the uterus, and then once in the uterus, the offspring will attach itself, or it will bury itself in the thick endometrium, and then that we call implantation. Okay, so we need 2 things. Like I said, we need an ovum for fertilization, and we need for the endometrium to be thick so that the offspring can implant itself there for the remainder of the pregnancy period. Okay, so on the next slide, I will be doing an overview of the menstrual cycle, and on the following slides, we will be looking at a detailed description of the menstrual cycle. All right, let's jump right into it. So, with regards to the menstrual cycle, what is it exactly are we talking about? The menstrual cycle is a 28-day cycle in which the female body prepares itself for a possible pregnancy. A 28-day cycle in which the female body prepares itself for a possible pregnancy. Remember, guys, the term menstruation and the menstrual cycle do not mean the same thing. Menstruation is a part of the menstrual cycle, but they are not synonymous. They do not mean the same thing. So, because we're saying with the menstrual cycle, we are preparing the female body for a possible pregnancy. What things do we need for a woman to be pregnant? Firstly, we need an ovum. We need an egg cell. Secondly, we need a thick endometrium. Uterus lining needs to be thick. So these are the two things that we need for pregnancy to be able to occur. What do we need an ovum for? We need an ovum for fertilization. Remember, a woman cannot be pregnant if fertilization does not occur. Right? Now, fertilization is when the nucleus of a haploid ovum is fertilized by the nucleus of a haploid sperm to produce a zygote. Now, pregnancy is not possible without an ovum because we need an ovum to be fertilized by a sperm in order to make a zygote. All right? And then the zygote will eventually become the blastocyst, if you can still remember. And then the blastocyst will implant itself on the thick endometrium. So, for implantation, we need for the blastocyst to attach itself to the endometrium. And for that to happen, the endometrium must be thick. So we need an ovum for fertilization and we need a thick endometrium for implantation. That's where the blastocyst will attach itself for the 9-month pregnancy period in human beings. Now, for us to get an ovum, for the female body to produce an ovum, it depends on hormones. So which two hormones are responsible for facilitating the production of an ovum? The first one is FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. Now, females, when they are born with thousands upon thousands of structures that we call follicles. And during puberty, remember, the pituitary gland will start secreting what we call follicle stimulating hormone. And what does it do? It stimulates the growth of the primary follicles, and then only one primary follicle will mature and become the Graafian follicle. Now, it is within the Graafian follicle, the bigger the Graafian follicle becomes, inside the Graafian follicle, we find a growing ovum. Okay? So, as the Graafian follicle becomes bigger and bigger and bigger under the influence of FSH, inside that follicle, oogenesis is taking place and an ovum is being produced. Now, to release that ovum from inside the Graafian follicle, we need the luteinizing hormone. So, LH, or the luteinizing hormone, what it does is that it ruptures, so it tears, it bursts the follicle, the Graafian follicle, and releases the ovum at day 14 that we know as ovulation. And then the second function of LH is that it takes the ruptured follicle and turns it into what we call a corpus luteum, or a yellow body. Remember, guys, we must stick to the language used in the examination guidelines. So we're not going to call the corpus luteum a yellow body. We rather call it by its scientific term, which is the corpus luteum. Now, what is the corpus luteum? The corpus luteum was the ruptured follicle. Now, LH converts the ruptured follicle into a corpus luteum at day 14 of the menstrual cycle. Okay, now we have an ovum. How do we achieve getting a thick endometrium for implantation? All right, now FSH and LH are secreted both by the pituitary gland, which is a gland at the base of the brain. Now, hormones that make and keep the endometrium thick, we have the first hormone, which is estrogen. Now, estrogen starts the process of making the endometrium thick. The endometrium starts off as very thin, and then from day 1 to day 13, the estrogen is secreted by the growing follicle. Remember, we said that primary follicles are stimulated by FSH to grow into a growing follicle. The larger or the bigger the Graafian follicle grows, the more it secretes estrogen. What estrogen does is that it thickens the endometrium from day 1 to day 13. Secondly, beyond day 13, meaning from day 14 to day 28, progesterone now takes over. Progesterone further thickens the endometrium, and it is secreted by the corpus luteum. So this, guys, was just an overview of the menstrual cycle. On the coming slides, we are going to look at the menstrual cycle in greater detail. So, let's get into much more detail about the events that occur during the menstrual cycle. So the way that we are going to do it, we are going to look at the menstrual cycle in periods of days. So the first period will be day 1 to 13, second period, day 14, third period, day 15 to 22, and then the third and last period will be from day 22 to day 28. So we will be describing events that happen in the uterus as well as in the ovaries during these different periods. So the first period, like I said, is from day 1 to day 13. The hormones that are secreted from day 1 and day 13 are firstly estrogen, firstly FSH first, sorry for that, and then it is estrogen. So in day 1 to day 13, only 2 hormones are secreted, which is FSH first and then estrogen next. Okay, let's look into day 1. Okay. So, let's get into much more detail about the events that occur during the menstrual cycle. So the way that we are going to do it, we are going to look at the menstrual cycle in periods of days. So the first period will be day 1 to 13, second period, day 14, third period, day 15 to 22, and then the third and last period will be from day 22 to day 28. So we will be describing events that happen in the uterus as well as in the ovaries during these different periods. So the first period, like I said, is from day 1 to day 13. The hormones that are secreted from day 1 and day 13 are firstly estrogen, firstly FSH first, sorry for that, and then it is estrogen. So in day 1 to day 13, only 2 hormones are secreted, which is FSH first and then estrogen next. Okay, let's look into day 1 to day 13. So, to understand the menstrual cycle, guys, to make it very easy for you, in the uterus, remember, that is the uterine cycle. The only thing that we are looking at is the thickness of the endometrium. So the focus is the thickness of the endometrium. And which 2 hormones did we say are involved with the thickness of endometrium? Firstly, estrogen starts the thickening of the endometrium, and progesterone finishes the thickening of the endometrium. In the ovarian cycle, or what happens in the ovaries, the only thing that we're going to be looking at or focusing on is the growth of the follicles. So in the uterus, our main focus, like we said, is the thick endometrium, or the thickening of the endometrium. And in the ovaries, we are looking at the growth of the follicle. Those are the 2 things. Remember, we said for pregnancy to occur, we need an ovum, which we get from a follicle. And then we also need this, a thick endometrium for implantation. Now, from day 1, what happens? In the uterus, the endometrium will shed, or it will break down. And this is called menstruation. It takes an average of 5 days, meaning it would occur from day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on average. Remember, every female is different and every month is also different. So one female may menstruate or shed her endometrium for 3 days, another one 5 days, another one 7 days. Okay? So it's not the same in every woman. So, like we said, the first thing that happens in the endometrium is that the endometrium starts being as thick, and then menstruation will occur where it will break down and blood will come out of the vagina, and then that we commonly call a menstrual period, or we commonly call a period. So that is menstruation. All right. Now, after menstruation, the endometrium will be thin. Remember, our goal is to make the endometrium to be thick so that implantation can occur. So, in the uterus, after menstruation has taken place, what happens in the ovaries? The pituitary gland secretes FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, to stimulate the growth of a primary follicle into a Graafian follicle or a mature follicle. So we would have a primary follicle there, and as the days move on, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, until day 13, the primary follicle will grow in size bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until at day 13 it becomes the Graafian follicle. So it matures, and when it is mature, we call it the Graafian follicle. The bigger the follicle grows as days pass, the more it secretes estrogen. So inside the ovaries, as the follicle grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it produces estrogen. So the bigger it grows, the more estrogen it produces. What influences it to grow bigger is FSH. Now, FSH is the very first hormone that is secreted. And what does it do? It grows a primary follicle bigger and bigger and bigger into a Graafian follicle. The more the follicle grows and matures, it secretes more estrogen. All right? Now, what does estrogen do? Let's go back and think about what estrogen does. Estrogen from the growing follicle thickens the endometrium as days pass. Now, the bigger the follicle becomes, the more it secretes estrogen. And what does estrogen do? Estrogen, its influence is there at the uterus. It makes the uterus lining to become thicker and thicker. So, let's look at that picture there. Let's say this is day 1 and that is day 13 over there. So let me just write that down. Let's say, for instance, here is our day 1 and there is our day 13. It's our day 13. Remember, we said from day 1, first thing that happens is that the uterus lining there, the endometrium, will shed. And that we call menstruation. And that usually takes an average of 5 days. Okay? It takes an average of 5 days. So that is menstruation. So menstruation is the shedding of the endometrium. So at that point over there, the endometrium now is thin. Okay? The endometrium is thin. Remember, we said for implantation to take place, the endometrium must not be thin, but the endometrium must be thick. Okay, so we've lost the thickness of the endometrium. So pregnancy cannot occur in such a state, or implantation cannot occur in such a state. Okay, now the pituitary gland will now start secreting FSH. Will now start secreting FSH. And then what does FSH do? It takes a primary follicle and it makes it to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and then bigger. So at day 13, the follicle will now be mature. All right? The more it grows bigger, the more it produces estrogen. And let's look at what estrogen does. Estrogen will make the endometrium to become thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker until day 13. I hope this makes sense. We are now moving on to our second period of the menstruation. And that period is day 14. Now, at day 14, only one hormone is secreted, and that is the luteinizing hormone. Remember, first hormone that is secreted, FSH, then it makes the follicles to become bigger and bigger and bigger. Then the follicles secrete our second hormone, which is estrogen. Day 1 to day 13, FSH and estrogen. Day 14, LH. All right. Now, at day 14, in the ovary, the follicle is now mature and it is called a Graafian follicle at day 14. And then the pituitary gland will start secreting our next hormone, our third hormone, which is LH. What does LH do? LH ruptures the Graafian follicle. Remember, the word ruptures means that it breaks the endometrium open. Sorry, not the endometrium. It breaks the Graafian follicle open. And then when the Graafian follicle breaks open, it releases an ovum. It releases an ovum, and this process is called ovulation. Remember, we said for pregnancy to occur, we need an ovum. So LH ruptures the mature or Graafian follicle to release an ovum, and then now that process is called ovulation. So there is ovulation. So there is our Graafian follicle. As you can see, it ruptures or breaks open, and then from inside the Graafian follicle comes an ovum. There is our ovum. Now, it means from day 1 to day 13, the female body did not have an ovum. So, if there is no ovum, therefore there is no fertilization. So from day 1 to day 13, we actually say that the woman is infertile. She has no ability to make children because to make kids, we know that we need an ovum to be fertilized by a sperm. So there is no follicle. There is no ovum in the first 13 days. We only find an ovum after day 14. Therefore, after day 14 or after ovulation, then we have an ovum and the woman is now fertile. What is the second job of LH? LH takes this very ruptured follicle, and converts it to a structure that we call the corpus luteum, as you can see over there. Now we have a corpus luteum. We don't have a follicle anymore. Moving right along to day 15 to day 22. In day 15 to day 22, what occurs? In the ovary, now remember, we no longer have a follicle because it has ruptured. Now we have a corpus luteum. So we are now looking at the growth of a corpus luteum. The corpus luteum grows in size from day 15 to day 22 as day goes by. So it starts off as small and becomes bigger and bigger until day 22. So the bigger the corpus luteum grows, the more progesterone it produces. Now, the corpus luteum is a structure inside the ovary that produces progesterone. The bigger it becomes, let's say this is day 15, and then this is day 22. So as the days pass, the corpus luteum becomes bigger and bigger. The bigger it becomes, the more it secretes progesterone, our last hormone. What does progesterone do? Progesterone acts on the uterus, and then here we're looking at the thickness of the endometrium. So progesterone further thickens the endometrium. It makes the endometrium to be thicker and thicker. Remember, which hormone started the thickening of the endometrium from day 1? That was estrogen. So from day 1 to day 13, estrogen starts the process of thickening the endometrium, and progesterone that is secreted by the corpus luteum further thickens the endometrium, meaning it makes it thicker and thicker. So if this was our day 15 and this was our day 22, we can see that the endometrium becomes thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. What makes the endometrium to become thicker? It is progesterone. And progesterone is secreted by the growing corpus luteum. All right, moving right along. Now, from day 23 to day 28. Now, this is where it starts becoming a bit complicated. So events that happen during day 23 to day 28 depend on whether fertilization has taken place or not. Okay? So if fertilization did not take place, what happens in the uterus and what happens in the ovary? So in the ovary, the corpus luteum will degenerate. By degenerate, we means it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it is completely broken down and we don't find it anymore. So the corpus, if there is no fertilization, then the corpus luteum will start to degenerate. So here is day 1, as you can see, and there is day 14, where ovulation takes place. Remember, after LH is the one that stimulates ovulation. LH is the one that stimulates ovulation. LH has two functions. After LH has ruptured the follicle, let me just fix that. Excuse me for a moment. After LH at day 14, actually, it's supposed to be 14 here. After LH has ruptured the follicle to release an ovum, it does its second function and it converts the ovum into a corpus luteum. Now, if fertilization did not take place at day 23 to day 28, then the corpus luteum will degenerate, become smaller and smaller and smaller until it completely disappears. Okay, until it completely becomes broken down by the female body. And then when it becomes smaller, what happens? Remember, the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. So the smaller it becomes, we are now there. The smaller it becomes, the less it secretes progesterone. And then in the uterus, what is going to be the impact in the uterus? Remember what progesterone does. Progesterone thickens the endometrium. So if we have less progesterone, what's going to happen? As progesterone levels drop, the endometrium becomes thinner. So at any point beyond day 23, you see the endometrium becoming thinner. You must know that fertilization did not take place. So what indicates to us that fertilization did not take place are the following in this case. After day 23, After day 23, when you see the corpus luteum degenerating, it means fertilization did not take place. After day 23, when you see the endometrium at any point becoming thinner, you must know that fertilization did not take place. So the endometrium will shed after day 28, and the menstrual cycle starts again from day 1. Okay? Now, because pregnancy did not occur, the endometrium will shed at day 21, and the cycle starts from scratch. The female body will prepare again for another 28 days for a possible pregnancy. But what happens if fertilization did take place? So, in the ovaries, the corpus luteum does not degenerate. All right? So, as you can see over there, ovulation took place at day 14, and then the corpus luteum does not degenerate, as you can see over there. It remains intact. And then if it remains intact, what is going to happen? If it does not if it does not degenerate, then it will secrete more progesterone. And remember, what does progesterone do? Progesterone further thickens the endometrium. So, as progesterone levels increase, the endometrium becomes thicker to maintain pregnancy. Let's see on that graph over there. So, remember, we are looking after day 22. So, we are there. The corpus luteum does not degenerate. It produces more progesterone. And then, as you can see, the levels of the endometrium continue to increase. That means pregnancy has taken place. Now, the endometrium is ready to implant. And we already have an ovum over there. All right, so the endometrium is ready for implantation of the blastocyst, which will become the embryo, and then it will become the fetus, and then after 9 months, the fetus will be born. So, just like that, we have reached the conclusion of lesson 1 on the menstrual cycle. I will not be giving you any exam type questions or assessment questions yet. There's quite a little bit more information that we need to look at in lesson 2 of the menstrual cycle, where we are going to be looking at the interpretation of graphs. In the meantime, please do react to my video, comment if you have any questions, subscribe so that my videos don't get lost on your algorithm, and do share the link to this video so that other people might benefit from this lesson as well. As usual, thank you so very much for watching my video. Catch me on the next lesson, where we'll be doing some interpretive work on graphs, and we will be looking at the different effects of the different hormones at different days and how these hormones interact with one another. Thank you so very much, and goodbye for now.